Hello there, and thank you for joining me this evening. It is currently 1:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep, so I figured that I would record a little something and maybe tell you some stories that hopefully you would enjoy. Hopefully my audio quality sounds okay. I did a whole bunch of audio tests trying to make it sound just right, and that was certainly a pain in the ass, but hopefully it sounds decent enough. Who knows, maybe that's just a sign to get a better microphone. But I figured, since it's late at night, and since usually around these times when I can't sleep, I usually like to listen to spooky stories. And I figured, since it's been a good while since I told any spooky stories, that I would go ahead and tell you a few of my personal spooky stories. So, sit down, relax, get comfortable, get your shotgun just in case you get a little too spooked, and hopefully somebody, somewhere, would enjoy. Alrighty, let's get into it. So, this first story takes place right around the time I was 12 or 13 years old, and me and my family, we had recently moved into a cabin-like house in rural Massachusetts, somewhere around that area. And this house, it was nice, don't get me wrong, but it had a very eerie atmosphere. And, granted, feelings are just feelings, but I know everyone in my family all had something to say about how spooky it was being both inside and outside the house. Now, the house was on several acres of land, or a few acres of land, and being outside in particular at nighttime felt so unwelcoming for all of us. And everybody in my family had some sort of story about being outside at nighttime in the backyard or on the back patio and feeling like they were being watched, feeling like there was something in the woods that was, eyeing them up. Nothing did not have good intentions for them. And my own personal experience was, on a few occasions, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods at nighttime, like I said. And the thing about these footsteps is, sure, they very well could have been a deer or a raccoon or anything like that, but when it is something like a deer, there's a certain gallop in the sound that they make when they move, or if it's a raccoon or a smaller creature, there's a certain scurry in the way that they move, versus with whatever I was hearing sounded very human, sounded like a person walking through the woods, and that certainly freaked me out. I didn't like that one bit. But I remember on one occasion, it was winter time, so it had gotten dark pretty quickly, and I was helping my mother move some groceries from the car inside, and I was outside by myself, grabbing a few of them, walking to the front door, when I heard, clear as day, what sounded like a person running through the trees towards the tree line and right at me. Now, I I couldn't see anything, and I certainly didn't stick around to find out. That the fear of God into me, that scared the bejesus out of me, and I went running inside, but that was pretty spooky. Now, that could have very well been a person, still very scary to think about, but I don't know. I remember on another occasion, I was outside, this was during the summertime, and I was shooting a little BB gun that I had, and I was just, shooting it at the trees, practicing, doing all that, and I had an additional sense of confidence to me, walking around the backyard at night, approaching that tree line, probably because of the BB gun in my hand, of course, but I remember I got a little too close to that tree line, and I remember hearing what sounded like two people having a conversation off in the woods somewhere, close enough to the tree line to be heard. It was just out of earshot, just far enough away as to where I couldn't make out what they were saying. And, as you can figure, I did not stick around to find out, but I remember hearing that, and that definitely spooked me out, and I didn't like being in those woods by myself, I'll tell you that much. As far as the inside of the house is concerned, however, like I said, it still had that very creepy and ominous atmosphere, and all the stereotypical horror story, ghost story things would happen. You'd hear a thump in the night, you would hear maybe walking around at nighttime, your keys would go missing, your phone would go missing, things would get misplaced and then turn up somewhere where you never thought to put them, or where you were certain you didn't put them. But I remember some of the more creepy things that happened there is I had sleep paralysis on a handful of occasions. Not much, but a few times. And when I did, of course, it would be the middle of the night, and I remember being there in my bed, not able to move, and I would hear from right outside my bedroom door, which was partially cracked open, what sounded like people having a conversation. And just like outside, it sounded just out of earshot, just far enough away as to where you couldn't make out what they were saying. And this really spooked me out, especially being 12, 13 years old at the time, and, not being able to move because of the sleep paralysis and all that. And on the 2 or 3 times that happened, it really spooked me out. I didn't like that one bit. Something else at that house that used to happen a lot, that both me, my mom, and my dad all had some sort of shared story, was waking up in the middle of the night, or in my case, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would hear my mom's voice or my dad's voice calling me from the other side of the house. And I would get up out of my bed and I would go investigate, and sure enough, they would both be asleep. This happened fairly frequently, I would say maybe a couple times a month. And I remember both my mom and my dad had approached me at separate times on separate occasions and had said to me, "Hey, were you calling for me last night in the middle of the night?" And I would say, no, I wasn't. Why are you asking? And they would say to me, "Well, I heard your voice calling me, going, 'Mom, Mom, Mom,' or 'Dad, Dad, Dad,' in the middle of the night." And then they would come and check on me, and sure enough, I would be sound asleep. So that was definitely something that was pretty freaky. That would happen frequently at that house. I would say, however, the scariest thing that happened while we were living there actually happened in the middle of the day. And on this occasion, I was outside with my younger brother, and we were playing catch. We throwing the ball back and forth, and I threw the ball towards my brother. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. My mom had just gotten home from work, and she had came outside and said hi to us, and she went back inside and went into the kitchen to go do whatever, and we got back to playing catch. And I had thrown the ball towards my brother, and it slipped out of his hands. He didn't catch it, and it rolled to the side of the house where my parents' bedroom was, or more specifically where their window was. And I didn't want my little brother running around the side of the house to go get it, because our house was on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill was a road. And it's just older brother stuff. I didn't want him running down there, because you don't know what's gonna happen. But anyway, I ran to the side of the house to go grab the ball, and I walked by my parents' bedroom, or their window there, and I saw my mom, and she walked right by the window, and she was wearing a different outfit from what I had initially seen her in when she got home and came outside to come say hi to us. And at the time I didn't think much of it. I figured that she, just went into her room after getting home from work and, got changed and, did whatever. And I went back to playing catch with my little brother. And a few minutes passed, and I went back inside. And when I did, I saw my mom in the kitchen, wearing the same thing she was wearing when she got home. And so I asked her, I said, "Hey, weren't you just in your room? Didn't you just get changed? Weren't you in there?" And she said to me, No, I wasn't. I haven't been home all day. Or I haven't been in my room all day. I just got home. I haven't been in my room since I left for work this morning. And I said to her, I just saw you in there, clear as day, walking by the window. And she was like, No, you didn't. I wasn't in my room. And that really freaked me out, especially considering I didn't see her face through the window. I saw her from the back. I don't really know how to explain it, but I saw her walking from the window, and I saw her going forward, so I was looking at her through the window from the back, and that really freaked me out. But as to my knowledge, I think that's basically everything that happened at that house. I might be forgetting some details, but that's basically it in a nutshell. As for this next story, this takes place when I was even younger. I think maybe around 8 or 9 years old. And it takes place at my grandmother's old house. And, we would go there a lot to visit and, spend the night and, do whatever. And I didn't really experience anything creepy myself, except for one occasion that I'll get to, but I remember both my mom and my aunt both said that they got a very, very creepy, eerie vibe from my grandmother's bedroom, and that they didn't like being in there by themselves. And me being as young as I was, I didn't really think much of it whatsoever, nor did I really care, to be honest. But I remember on one occasion I was outside, and my grandmother had asked me to go grab something from her car, And so I had obliged, of course, and I went outside to go towards the garage, and her garage was separated from the main house. You know, it wasn't connected, so you had to go across the driveway to get there. And so I did, and I went into the garage, and I got whatever she needed from the car. Don't exactly remember, but I remember turning around, walking towards the garage door, and I was only a few feet away from the door itself. And as I was, walking out, when I heard, clear as day, right behind me, a man's voice go, "Hey!" And that scared the bejesus out of me, and I went for that front door running. And needless to say, I did not like going to that garage by myself after that. And I remember, on another occasion, my older cousin had told me a story about how he was dropping something off at Grandma's house, and he had pulled in, he had dropped whatever he needed off, and he was walking back to his car, and he heard from the side of the garage a voice shout, "Hey!" And this kind of freaked him out. He was like, "Well, what the hell? Is there somebody on the property? Is there, like, what the heck was that?" And so he goes to the side of the garage, and he goes to check it out, and sure enough, there's nobody there. And so he's like, okay, that's weird, but, whatever. And he goes back to his car, and as soon as he gets to his door to his car, he hears from the other side of the garage, now the side that is closest to my grandmother's house, the same voice go, "Hey!" And that really spooked him out, but, he went to go investigate, if I'm remembering the story correctly. I'm pretty sure I am. He went to go investigate, and he walked to that side of the house, didn't see anything, and he started approaching to where the back of the garage was behind it. And as he did, I remember him telling me, and I remember this part distinctly, that he was getting such a very odd and eerie and spooky feeling, and just like a twist in his gut the closer he got to the back of that garage. And ultimately, he just turned around and he left. He wasn't sticking around to find out because, let's just say it's nothing paranormal. That's not somebody on the property, and somebody on the property when nobody's home and you're by yourself and you don't know who that is, well, that's scary enough as it is. But what I would say is the scariest story from that house was, sure enough, from my grandmother herself. And I remember her telling all of us this story. And what happened essentially was she was home one day and she had decided to go take a nap. And she laid down in her bed, dozed off, and she had a dream where she was in her bed in the same exact spot where she has fallen asleep. And in this dream, she saw shadow figures running back and forth across her walls. And they were going for several minutes, just running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then suddenly and jarringly, all of them stopped. And they froze there for however long. They just stood there. And then, just as suddenly as they stopped, all of them jolted and ran right into the corner of the room, right where she has her little TV. And as soon as they did, and as soon as all of them got to that little corner, she woke up. And sure enough, she was in the same place in her bed, lying down. And when she woke up, she saw that all of the animals in the house were in the room with her. Both of the cats were on her bed with her. The more braver of the cats, or the two cats to be specific, the one that was more brave than the other, was perched up, staring at the corner where she had seen all of these figures run into. And he was hissing, and he was growling, and he was perching up like he was ready to attack, and then the more skittish cat was backed away towards the corner of the bed, poofed up, shaking, and still, eyes right on that corner of the room. And her dog was standing on the floor, sure enough, staring right at that corner and barking her head off. Whatever it was threatening her, or she felt threatened by it, and all of those animals felt threatened by whatever the hell that was, and that very much spooked my grandmother to experience, especially because she's not the type to really believe in the paranormal or in ghosts or in anything like that. So for someone to experience that firsthand, I imagine that, it would really, really scare them. And I'm pretty sure that's just about it for that house as well. I can't really think of anything else besides, the basement feeling creepy, or being outside at nighttime felt creepy, or, there's just, basic stuff. And I did just notice that this video is getting a little bit longer than I anticipated. So I do think that we are going to hold off on a third story. But hey, that just gives me an excuse to make another one of these videos in case anybody enjoys. Which, don't get me wrong, I have plenty of stuff to talk about in this regard. I have had some very spooky things happen to me in my life. I remember there was a long period of time where I didn't really believe in the paranormal, or I didn't really believe in ghosts or anything like that, and sure enough, these experiences that I just talked about, and a good amount of other experiences, they definitely changed my mind. But those are stories for another day. So, if you made it this far, I certainly hope you enjoyed. I hope I didn't spook you out too much. Hopefully you can go put that shotgun away. I don't think it's going to be necessary tonight. I hope you're able to get some sleep and have sweet dreams and have an amazing time tomorrow when you wake up. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to get going. So, once again, thank you for watching. Take care and have an amazing night.